Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we're taking a look at the Intel ARC A750 limited edition, some of my thoughts, some of my criticisms and a general overview. So if you're potentially thinking of getting one of these, then you may want to watch the rest of the video. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video we're taking a look at the Intel ARC A750 limited edition from Intel using their latest technology. This is actually something which I've been waiting for a very, very long time. Now, for those of you old enough to remember, Intel did actually do a standalone graphics card back in the heady days. I think it was around about 2000, something along those lines. And there was an Intel i740, which was an AGP graphics card, which was pretty painful to say the least. And really you needed to use a separate 3D accelerator with it, such as a Voodoo card. Yep, I'm going back way, way far there. Anyway, things have changed quite considerably, and Intel brought out their new Alchemist range of graphics cards, starting off with the A380, A750, and A770, and there allegedly is an A780, which is slightly more elusive, but the A750 is the one which I think is going to appeal to pretty much most people. This is a mid-range card with pretty much a mid-range price. You can pick these up here in the United Kingdom at the time of filming for approximately £150, give or take, depending on where you shop around. There are some rebates and offers on, so potentially worth looking into those to save a little bit more. But realistically, you're going to be paying around about £250, which puts it slap bang in the crosshairs of AMD's RX 6600 and some other graphics cards, such as the RTX 3060 is starting to come down in price and potentially is a very similar card to this, depending obviously what you want, whether you're team red, whether you're team blue, or whether you're team green. There's a lot of choice at the moment for that kind of £250 mark at the moment on the market. But is the Intel one actually worth spending your money on? So you do get 8 gigs of RAM, which is going to be pretty much what you expect these days. We are starting to see some modern AAA titles going way over the 8 gigs mark, especially some of those more unoptimized titles. But I think for a lot of people who are looking at spending around $250 on a graphics card with a relatively modest system, I think this has a lot to offer, such as an HDMI port, 3 display ports, dual fan cooling, very nice looks, a little bit of lighting on the side, and it fits into a pretty small form factor. One of the things you'll notice straight away when you take this graphics card out of the box is its sheer weight. It's an extremely heavy card. Even though it fits in a dual slot design, there's a lot of weight to it, and the cooling system appears to be very good, although I haven't quite had the guts to take it apart yet in case I invalidate my warranty. No doubt at some point in the future I'll be stripping it down to replace the paste and all that kind of good stuff. Maybe subscribe to the channel to see how that goes in the future. Something else to discuss is going to be software. Now, when the cards first came out, there was a little bit of upheaval because DirectX 9 titles and some older games had some pretty poor pacing problems, and actually with the latest drivers, out of which there was one that was released yesterday on the 13th of April 2023, a new beta version, and it seems that in the majority of titles that has been pretty much eliminated, or at least reduced to a point where the games are completely playable. Other things which have been added into the Intel ARC system are the ability to record gameplay and also up to 4K, although previously it had been limited to 1440p. So it seems that the software is starting to mature, even though this has only been on the market for about 6 months now. So I think Intel are going in the right direction. For some people as well, if you're potentially on the fence a little bit and thinking maybe this is going to be a flash in the pan, we have heard recently that Intel will be following up and have actually placed orders with TSMC for the Battlemage and Celestial range of graphics cards, which will be the successors to the Alchemist or of the ARC range. So if you're thinking that maybe you're going to buy this and they're going to disappear like they pretty much did in the last time they entered the graphics card market, then I think you should be okay at least for the foreseeable 3 to 4 years, looking at the trajectory of the Battlemage and Celestial range. Anyway, that's enough of that. You probably don't care less about any of that stuff. What you really care about is actually how does it perform. So let's take a look at some synthetics first of all. So first of all, this is going to be 3D Mark Time Spy. Time Spy runs very nicely. This is going to get a score at the end of 12.195, which is pretty respectable in this particular version in this setup, which I should actually discuss the setup. This setup is based on a relatively modest budget. Now I could have tested it with a top-end CPU just to see how things go, but I figured realistically, most people, if you're going to be spending £250 on a graphics card, there's not really much chance you're going to be spending £500, £400 on a CPU. So I paired this with a very modest setup. So we're using a B660 chipset motherboard from ASUS. We're also using the Intel 12400F, which is a relatively inexpensive processor at the moment in the UK, around about £125, and just 16 gigs of DDR4 3200. So we haven't really gone to town on this. It's a pretty basic spec, but still it does appear to be performing rather well. And also the synergy between the Intel processor, the Intel chipset, and obviously an Intel graphics card does actually appear to be paying dividends. Anyway, so that was 3D Mark Time Spy. Next on to Port Royale. So this is a RTX or ray tracing type test. And with this we get a score of 6,747 points, which appears to be pretty great. So I'm relatively happy with that. Although, to be honest with you, when it comes to ray tracing on a £250 graphics card, you obviously should temper your expectations. Where previously you had to expect the worst, now you can expect things to be very nice in CSGO. So this is CSGO running at 1080p at the highest settings, and it runs really, really well. We're looking at frames per second of somewhere between 250 and 350 FPS, and it runs very smoothly. And as you can see from the actual frame times, pretty smooth as well. There's no real glitches or errors or anything. It all seems to be running very smoothly, and is an extremely enjoyable experience, which is a lot more than you could have said for the drivers 6 months ago. Going from one extreme to the other, let's take a look at a AAA title from not so long ago. So this is Cyberpunk 2077, and with this we're running at 1080p. Now this is with the high settings and also with a moderate ray tracing enabled, and we can see here we're getting anywhere between sort of 45 to 60 FPS, which, to be honest with you, anything over 30 FPS in a title like this is completely playable. Again, frame times are pretty reasonable, pretty stable. There's no massive spikes or glitches. And yeah, it looks very nice, runs very nice, and is very playable. Highly recommended at this resolution. I think knocking up to 1440p could be potentially problematic. Next, taking a look at a slightly older AAA title. So this is Far Cry 5 New Dawn. Again, one of my favourites, a very nice game to play. Lots of scenery, lots of foliage, and lots of things which can trip up graphics cards in lots of areas. So this is running at 1080p again. This is running at the ultra settings, and with all the scaling and resolutions set to normal or native 1:1. And in this we're getting averaging around about 100 FPS, which for a title such as this is absolutely excellent. And bearing in mind that not so long ago, running with something like a 2070, you would be getting very similar results to this when the game first came out. So yeah, it's doing pretty well, and in terms of price wise, yeah, I think it's performing excellently considering this isn't really a native title for Intel. Next up, something which is easy to run and runs on basically anything, although if you crank up the settings, it does pose a challenge for some graphics cards, especially those with lower amounts of VRAM, so the 8 gigs of RAM in here is going to be helpful over some of the older cards with 4 gigs, such as the 1650s and things of that ilk. So this is Rocket League, 1080p, highest settings, and we're getting anywhere between sort of 300 frames per second. It does dip up and down very slightly, but not a great deal, and is relatively smooth and steady, and actually looks really nice as well. There is something which can be said about the Intel color science. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this is a thing or not. I know that before, years ago, if you had a AMD graphics card, you could actually tell the difference between that and a Nvidia card or a Voodoo 3DFX card because of the depth, resolutions, etc. And it just seemed that the Radeon cards had a little bit more depth to their color, a little bit more saturation. And actually, I think I'm finding that as well with the Intel cards. There does seem to be a little bit more saturation in the colors. Maybe it's just me. Let me know what you think in the comments. Next up, one of our favourites here at Mike's Unboxing. This is Wreckfest. Again, this is at 1080p, and this is now running at 1080p Ultra. So again, lots of textures, lots of things here which can potentially trip up graphics cards with limited VRAM. So this is running anywhere between 100 and 150 FPS. There are some very small dips into the 80s, especially at the start of maps, etc., which is very common pretty much on all graphics cards. So you get that initial dip when there's lots of cars around, then it kind of settles down. And as you go out into the longer straights, and maybe if you're on your own, then the frame rate will go up quite a bit, as it will do with pretty much any graphics card. I think here, 100 FPS plus is a very good outing for Wreckfest 1080p at ultra settings. Next up, we're looking at Fortnite. So again, this is one of those titles which in the beginning actually did trip up this graphics card quite a bit, and some of the frame time pacing was absolutely awful. As you can see now, we're running at 1080p epic settings with TSR set to epic also, and we're getting anywhere up to around about 70 frames per second. Again, frame times are excellent. This is one of those titles, as with pretty much most titles, with actually most graphics cards these days, the easier the game is to run, the better your frame time is going to be. So obviously if you want a smoother gameplay, then reduce your settings accordingly, and you'll find that the game is much smoother and your frame times are a lot tighter. Increase the settings, increasing the resolution and putting more strain on the graphics card is going to increase those frame times. So do bear that in mind. Obviously for the best possible gaming performance, especially competitive, then try and reduce your settings, as most competitive players will do anyway. So there you go. That is Fortnite, and it is set to epic, and I think it actually looks epic as well. So there you go. There's a look at some gameplay. Something else which we should touch on as well is things like temps and power usage. Power usage is one of those things which was a little bit problematic. There has been a tweak you can make into the BIOS, which actually goes to, I think it's the PCI Express signaling, and it basically allows it to go into a more of a sleep state. Currently, I'm getting anywhere between sort of 7 to 15 watts, sometimes a little bit higher, as a idle setting, which is actually pretty good, especially considering that previously, if you didn't make those tweaks or settings in the BIOS, you would be looking at much closer to 40 watts on idle. So that is an impressive jump. It's a shame that that wasn't integrated into the drivers or into the card itself from the get-go. I think that would have made a big difference. I think it's something which people did play on a little bit. In terms of actual power usage, because this particular card uses a 8-pin PCI Express and also a 6-pin, potentially it can draw a lot more power, although it has got a TDP rating of somewhere around about the 190 watts mark, which does put it a little bit higher than its competition, especially things like the RX 6600 or possibly the RTX 3060, which will draw slightly less power. Although I do feel that with some driver tweaking and some optimization, I do feel that the Intel ARC A750 can put both of those firmly into the dust. It does appear to be doing pretty well so far. When it comes to temperatures, due to the fact that it is a slightly higher TDP card and isn't quite as optimized as it could be, this is still only a 6-month-old video card at this point, we are looking at temperatures up to and including around about 73 degrees Celsius. That was the highest recorded temperature that I found during my game testing, and this was in a 24 degrees Celsius room. So it's not entirely bad, and we have seen graphics cards get considerably hotter, but I still think there is a little bit of room in there for some thermal management and also some wattage management to bring this thing down into being a slightly more efficient beast. So overall, I think for £250, it's actually pretty compelling. I would love to see these come out now, sort of £225, maybe even £200. I think at that price it's an absolute no-brainer. Now for some people, if you're just doing gaming, I don't think you've got any concerns whatsoever. Most of the driver bugs and issues have been ironed out so far. Where it does change a little bit is for those that are doing a little bit of everything. So if you're also into a little bit of content creation, potentially, because this does support AV1 encoding and decoding, in the future, it could turn out to be an absolutely fantastic investment. But as things stand at the moment, still no support for it actually in Adobe Premiere, which is a crying shame. So potentially, if you are wanting to do video editing on it, you're not going to have quite the experience that potentially you could have. Come on, Adobe. Please just flick the switch and enable AV1 encoding. This was going to make the Intel ARC series so desirable, especially when there isn't really much competition from the NVIDIA range when it comes to video editing. So overall, I think £250 spent on this. I think I've done pretty well. I was looking at this when they first came out and trying to be an early adopter. I'm actually really pleased that I didn't, and I waited a little while for the drivers to mature. I think if I'd have got one early on, I think I may have been slightly more disappointed, especially in some of those older titles with the issues they were having with DirectX 9. But having waited a little bit and being a little bit behind the curve, I feel that I've saved some money and also saved some heartache with those poor drivers. Anyway, what I think about it isn't important. What you think about it is. So let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. But for now, I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To. And hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.